Chapter 24. Garrett lifted his robe and tugged down the edge of his trousers to reveal a large purple bruise in the rough shape of a Templar's boot heel.
"He got you pretty good,"
Warren said, coming back through the doorway of the crumbling Merovin hovel. The ghoul was grinning, but his eyes betrayed his concern for his friend.
"Yeah,"
Garrett laughed, wincing a little.
"not as good as you got him."
Warren chuckled, setting down the heavy canvas bundle he was carrying onto a two-legged table with one end propped on a broken headstone. The makeshift sack spilled open, full of small, saucer-shaped pies still steaming from the oven. Garrett's stomach rumbled at the smell, and then twisted in a knot at the thought of what might be in them. Warren stuffed one in his mouth and talked while he chewed.
"Want something to eat?"
No thanks."
"Don't worry,"
Warren said, fishing out a few pieces of crumbling crust.
"I had to make some without filling for you."
"Thanks," Garrett said, taking the crusts from Warren's paw. He hesitated only a moment before tucking in. "Do you think Caleb and Lampwick are all right?"
"Yeah,"
Warren said.
"they're better off than you'd be if they caught you. They'd probably drop down a hole somewhere, but zombies and fairies are worth a lot of money."
"You think they'd sell them?" Garrett asked, a cold, sick feeling in the pit of his stomach.
"Probably,"
Warren said.
"but your uncle will sort them out as soon as he gets back. They'd have never tried something like that if he'd been here."
The ghoul picked up one of the algae lamps and carried the glowing blue jar over to his nest. He kicked around the pile of rags and fur, looking for something.
"Found it,"
he said, stooping to pull an old leather backpack from beneath his crude mattress. "What's going on?" Garrett asked.
"Gotta load up all these travel tarts and get going,"
Warren said, returning the algae lamp to the table. He held the mouth of the bag open with one hand and used his shaggy arm to sweep the pile of food into the bag. "Where are we going?" Garrett asked. Warren slung the pack over his shoulder and walked to the little window by the door. He lifted the ragged leather blind and looked out at the fires of Merovin.
"The others want to clear out for a while, in case the priestesses want to move against us too. They're headed south."
"Is it true?" Garrett asked, his voice shaking. "What they said about the army?"
"I don't know," Warren said. "People are saying that something really bad happened up north. I think the priestesses think something did."
"So everybody is just going to run away?" Garrett said.
"Not me,"
Warren said, looking back at him. The firelight through the window gleamed on Warren's bared fangs.
"I'm going to find my dad."
"We have to find a way out of the city and head north," Garrett said. He brushed the crumbs from his robe and picked up his knife belt and satchel.
"It isn't going to be easy,"
Warren sighed.
"We're going to have to go out through the spillway and slog through the mire in the dark. We won't be able to use the roads with the greens watching."
Garrett frowned, thinking in silence for a moment before he spoke again. "There might be another way, but I don't think you're going to like it."
"I don't see anyone,"
Warren said. The heavy bronze grate scraped loudly against the paving stones as the ghoul shoved it aside. He leapt out of the drain and pulled Garrett up after him into the dark, rain-slick street above. Above the steady patter of raindrops came the faraway shriek of a watcher, and Garrett started at the sound.
"Don't worry," Warren said. "They don't come inside the foreign district."
"Where are we?" Garrett asked, looking around. He didn't recognize the tall, whitewashed buildings on either side of the street. Strange minarets and gilded domes rose above the relatively plain 30-foot-high walls, and flickering, steaming torches lined the ornately crenellated parapets.
"The satyrs live here," Warren said. "At least the rich ones do. I come here sometimes with my dad."
"You have satyr friends?" Garrett asked.
"It's more for business," Warren said. "Satyrs are pretty dangerous to deal with. They get involved in some shady stuff, and, well, there aren't many other places where a ghoul can actually get paid for the services we provide."
"You mean they—" Garrett's voice trailed off.
"Just say that if you ever owe a satyr money, you should probably pay him back as quick as you can."
"Oh," Garrett said. His eyes went to the torches above. From within the walls came the muffled sound of a low, mournful chant and the steady beat of drums and bells.
"This way,"
Warren said, loping over to peek around the corner of the wall. Garrett followed and peered around the corner to see the familiar black monolith of the vampire compound standing only a block away.
"Looks clear," Warren said, "but let's stick to the wall just in case."
Garrett flattened himself to the wall and kept close behind the shaggy ghoul as they sprinted from shadow to shadow. Warren indicated the door of the compound with a thrust of his chin, and Garrett ran the last gap alone. He dove into the shadowy alcove and reached for the bell pull, but his hand froze as the door swung open before him. Marla stood there, framed against the blackness within. She blinked in astonishment and then sprung forward to wrap him in a crushing hug.
"Oh, Garrett," she cried. "I was so worried."
She released him and stepped back. She was dressed entirely in black leather traveling gear with a slim rucksack strapped over her shoulder. Her hair was tied back in a top knot, and she wore 2 slender, curved knives on her hips. "Wow," Garrett gasped. "Where are you going?"
"To find you, silly,"
she laughed, wiping her eyes.
"I heard."
She sniffed loudly and hugged him again. "Thanks," Garrett said. "I mean, for worrying about me."
"I'm just glad you're all right,"
she said, stepping back with her hands on his shoulders. "Warren's here too," he said. "We've got to get out of the city."
"Where are you going to?"
Marla asked. "We have to find the other necromancers and Warren's dad. I was hoping that your flying friends might help us get out tonight," Garrett said, smiling hopefully. Marla shook her head.
"They've all gone away north,"
she said. Her lips pursed in thought and then broadened to a sly smile.
"Come inside, both of you. I've got an idea."
Marla stuffed Garrett's satchel with food and a pair of thin, gray blankets before slinging a couple of water skins over his other shoulder to counterbalance the load.
"Lovecraft prefers his meals twice a day, at dusk and dawn," Marla said, looking at Clavicus. "You'll need to feed the pets at the shop every other day, at least the ones that eat food. You've done it before for Mother, haven't you?"
Clavicus nodded and wrung his thin hands together. His lips pulled back over his long yellow teeth as his eyes moved from Marla to Garrett to Warren, and then to the 3 snarling black dire wolves she had pulled from the kennel.
"I don't think your mother would approve at all, milady,"
the gangly vampire said.
"I suspect you are right," Marla admitted. "I will probably be reprimanded when she returns."
"A reason, perhaps, not to go?"
he said, making a nervous clicking noise in his throat as his gaze fell upon Garrett once more. Garrett felt a chill go through him, but forced a cheerful smile.
"No," Marla sighed. "I need to do this. Mother will understand, and I hope that you do as well."
"I must confess, I do not,"
Clavicus said.
"I'm depending on you to look after things while I'm away," Marla said. "Whatever Mother thinks of my actions, she will undoubtedly appreciate your handling of her affairs in my absence."
Clavicus blinked and nodded.
"I will do my duty, milady."
"I know you will, Clavicus," she said. "Your honor is never questioned."
A wolf snapped at Warren's elbow, and the ghoul jumped away with a startled yelp. Marla spun and issued a command in Draconic, cowing the 3 horse-sized lupines into submission.
"I don't think I can do this," Warren said.
Garrett had just been thinking the same thing.
"They just need to get accustomed to your smell," Marla assured him. "Until then, they will, at least, obey my command not to eat you."
Warren's laughter died away when he saw she wasn't smiling. "You don't have maybe a pony or something?" Garrett asked. Marla frowned at him.
"In 2 days' time, you and Goss will be the best of friends."
Garrett looked at the monstrous wolf, who, in turn, regarded him the way it might regard a plump rabbit. When it growled, Garrett felt a rumble all the way down to his bowels.
"So I just jump on his back and hold on?"
Warren asked, cocking his head to the side as he studied his direwolf.
"Yes," Marla said, "except I wouldn't jump on Hosker. You should clasp his mane tightly and climb onto his back. Lean forward with your legs astride and hold onto his fur."
Clavicus looked on with a sickly yellow smile as Marla tutored her friends on the proper handling of a direwolf. Within a half hour, she had managed to get both of them atop their mounts and pointed toward the stone ramp leading up from the stables. Marla mounted the she-wolf Rega and led Gauss and Husker forward with packs of traveling gear slung around their necks and Garrett and Warren clinging to their backs.
"Good hunting, my lady,"
Clavicus cried as the great wolves carried them away. Chapter 25. The 3 of them emerged into the gentle pre-dawn rain, riding their wolves through the side gate of the vampire compound.
Won't the night watch get us if we try to leave the city?
Garrett whispered.
You don't have to whisper, Marla said. There's no one else around, and anyway, not all the gates are guarded by the Watchers. Foreign ambassadors can use an entrance called the Dusk Gate. Only a small contingent of Templars guard it, and they will not ask questions if we wish to leave.
Templars? Garrett asked.
Yeah,
Warren said.
We're not very popular with those guys right now.
Marla chuckled.
Don't worry. You're my servants, and we're on official business. They wouldn't dare try to stop us.
Garrett smiled despite his growing unease. Marla's wolf turned and padded down the dimly lit street, and the other two beasts followed close behind. The distant shriek of a watcher carried on the cold night breeze. Garrett pulled himself tight against Gauss's bristly fur. The wolf's fur, damp from the rain, smelled of musk and old hay. The beast's muscles rippled beneath his fur as he moved, emanating a warm glow of silent power. Garrett still feared the wolf, but it was now only a distant sensation of awe and dread. He could face that if he had to, for Marla's sake.
It won't be long now, Marla called back. There's the Dusk Gate.
Garrett looked up to see the city wall rising above the buildings ahead. The broad lane dead-ended into a wide archway and a barred gate illuminated by a half-dozen Witchfire street lamps. 9 armored men in green surcoats stood before the gate, talking. They noticed the approaching wolves and, at the command of one, fanned out to bar the path.
I am Legate Veranu of the Thrinian Embassy, Marla announced as they approached. We have need of the gate with all haste.
One of the Templars moved as though to comply and then stopped himself, looking to the sergeant who had ordered them to bar the road. The sergeant's bruised and bandaged face twisted into a gap-toothed snarl when he saw Garrett and Warren. "You!" he hissed.
Oh, fish,
Warren said. "Run!" Garrett cried. Marla whirled her mount around and bounded away from the gate, shouting in Draconic. Gauss and Halsker lunged after her. Garrett grabbed 2 fistfuls of Gauss's fur and held on with all his strength, burying his face in the wolf's back. The dire wolf stretched and bunched beneath him, its long strides leaving the Templars far behind in a matter of moments. The strident blare of a horn tore through the night, and others answered it beyond the rooftops. Then the nightmare cries of the Watchers roared out in unison, and Garrett knew they were doomed. A garrison of Templemen spilled into the street, cutting their path back to the embassy. Shouts of alarm rose as the men spotted the wolf riders. A buzzing hiss split the air as a crossbow bolt ripped past Gauss's head. More followed, clattering and shattering against nearby walls, none finding their marks. Marla led them into the momentary safety of an alleyway. They emerged into a side street, looking for a way out.
Find a tunnel,
Warren shouted. Garrett looked at Marla, her face blank with fear.
No, Garrett said. The wolves can't fit in the tunnels. We'll have to run for it. Find another way out of the city.
A crossbow bolt whistled and skittered along the cobblestones from up the street, and Templars cried out, pointing toward them.
The lift, Garrett shouted. Marla, can we make it there?
She looked at him and nodded.
Follow me,
she said, and her wolf bounded away toward the market district. The 2 male wolves followed with their terrified burdens bouncing on their backs. Another gate stood between them and the market in the low wall that separated the merchant's quarter from the foreign district. A score of Templars waited there with clubs and crossbows ready. The wolves' toenails scratched on the damp cobbles as they skidded to a halt. They huffed with exertion, their breath a pale mist in the night air.
Do not fear, Marla said.
She leaned forward, urging Rhaegar into a charge, straight toward the startled gatemen.
Idiot low cannon,
she cried as the wolves surged forward. The Templars raised their bows and fired, but their shots went wide. The guardsmen faltered, terror on their faces, as the 3 monstrous wolves bore down on them. Just as Garrett was sure they would crash headlong into the armored men, Marla's wolf altered its course diagonally and leapt high into the air. The wolf landed atop the roof of the Templar's stable, sending clay shingles flying. Garrett gasped as Gauss leapt in turn, knocking the wind from the boy as they landed hard atop the low building. Halsker landed beside them with Warren on his back. The ghoul looked just as frightened as Garrett.
Athlon,
Marla shouted, and her wolf leapt again, this time to a long, flat-roofed building across the narrow street that ran the length of the wall. Gauss and Halsker followed, and the 3 of them raced along the roof to a spot farther down where a series of adjacent and consecutively taller buildings acted as a stairway. With a final great leap, they crossed the street again, landing atop the dividing wall. Garrett's stomach churned as Gauss hopped down to land beside Marla and Rega in the empty streets of the merchant's quarter.
Where the hell are we going?
Warren shouted. The ghoul looked miserable, clinging to Hausker's fur, with one leg barely draped over the wolf's back as he struggled to reorient himself.
The lifts that bring goods up from the lower city, Garrett said. We can use them to get down and get out through the canals.
That's crazy,
Warren groaned.
No, he's right, Marla said. We can make it.
With a horrible shriek, a skeletal watcher lurched from the gloom toward them. It stood over 9 feet tall, a mismatched collection of animal bones strapped together with iron bands. Long black claws ripped downward toward Garrett's head. Gauss yelped as he sidestepped the watcher's attack. Sparks flew where the watcher's steel-tipped talons split the paving stones. The wolves needed no urging to flee, racing up the shadowy lane. Another watcher stepped out to block the street ahead, but Marla ducked beneath its claws as Rega slipped past. With a furious howl, Hausker drove his 2 massive forepaws into the monster's breastbone, sending it crashing to the ground. Warren cheered wildly as the direwolf carried him over the fallen watcher, and Gauss followed quickly past before the thing could recover. They raced on toward a ruddy haze in the night sky above the rooftops. Smoke, lit by torches below, hung above the great warehouse that fed the hungry stalls of the market during the day. At night, men labored to refill the warehouse with all manner of goods, lifted up on great wooden elevators from the canal boats of the lower city. Marla's wolves ramped up the sloping roof of a carriage house and cleared the perimeter fence in one easy step. Workmen scattered, dropping their loads in panic as the direwolves snarled and snapped. "There!" Garrett cried, jabbing his finger toward a wooden platform 30 feet square, loaded with crates. Suspended by chains from an overhead gantry, it descended slowly through a gap in one of the 4 wrought iron structures that hung like black wings over the cliff that marked the natural dividing line between the upper and lower city. The other 3 lifts were out of sight, somewhere below. "Quickly," Marla said, and the wolves raced toward the lowering platform. The iron grate of the walkway bounced and rang with a hollow metallic sound beneath the pounding feet of the heavy wolves. Above, Garrett heard the steady clacking of gears as the ox-driven pulleys dragged the massive counterweight skyward to lower the lift. They reached the edge, and dizziness threatened to overcome him as Garrett looked down through the gap. The lift platform hung 20 feet below the walkway and over 500 feet above the canal docks of the lower city. Marla's wolf jumped, and Garrett let out a warbling cry as Gauss leapt after her. The 3 wolves crashed among the empty crates stacked high on the descending lift. They landed off-center, causing the platform to swing wildly. Gauss whined, his shaggy legs splaying as he dug his claws into the rough wood. His hind leg kicked out, sending a crate over the edge. Other crates toppled and followed it into the gulf. Garrett sucked in a mouthful of air and spit, coughing violently as he clung to the great wolf's back.
"Poxy dog, you're gonna kill me!"
Warren shouted.
"Hold still!"
A growling Hausker scrambled back to the center of the swaying platform where all 3 wolves gathered to huddle and whine, the whites showing in eyes wide with terror. Garrett managed to cough up the last of his inhaled spit, grateful not to have coughed up his dinner as well. He looked at Marla. Her topknot had come loose, and long strands of dark hair hung askew over her own wide eyes as she pressed her cheek tightly to Rega's back. Meeting his gaze, her lips split into a grin, and she burst out laughing. Garrett coughed out a ragged laugh as well, and soon Warren joined in, helpless against the absurdity of the situation.
"We made it," Marla said.
Garrett tried to speak, but a fresh wave of coughing kept him from doing any more than nodding in agreement. The 3 wolves gingerly rose to their full heights and dared a look around, whimpering at what they saw. Marla cooed and stroked their fur, reassuring them with gentle words in Draconic.
"What do we do when we get to the bottom?"
Warren asked, looking a little sick.
"I don't know," Garrett said, "but it's better than being back up there."
Marla swung down from Rega's back and stepped lightly to the platform's edge. She looked over the side.
"There are a number of boats down there," she said. "We can probably find one leaving the city."
"Won't they search the boats?" Garrett asked. Marla shrugged.
"Maybe they won't search the ones leaving the city. I don't know."
A long moment passed in silence but for the steady clanking of machinery growing ever more distant and the night breeze whistling through the chains.
"Thank you," Garrett said.
Marla smiled at him and then looked away.
"Just going for a ride with my friends," she said. "I mean it," Garrett said. "You saved my life tonight."
Marla blushed.
"To tell the truth," she said, "if I'd had to spend one more day in that stupid embassy, I probably would have died of boredom. I guess that makes us even then."
Garrett laughed.
How far down do we have to go?
Warren groaned. Marla glanced up, then over the side again.
"Looks like we're about halfway. We'll be passing another lift soon."
Suddenly the lift lurched beneath them, the chains groaning against a sudden strain.
What happened?
Warren said. Marla looked up.
"Oh no,"
she said. Her hand blurred with motion as she yanked a knife from her belt and cut a crossbow bolt out of the air. 2 more bolts thudded into the platform on either side of Garrett's wolf, causing Gauss to yelp in alarm. The platform lurched again, and Garrett saw the lift's massive counterweight, almost level with them now, begin to slowly descend.
We're going back up, aren't we?
Warren said. What do we do? Garrett asked. Marla ran to the edge and looked down. She looked at Garrett, fear and desperation in her eyes. She swung up onto Rhaega's back and looked at her friends. "Trust me," she said. Rhaega crouched and then bounded forward, leaping over the side of the lift.
"Oh, hell,"
Warren said. Gauss followed his packmate into the void, and Garrett fell with him. Wind whipped the hood back from Garrett's head, giving him an unobstructed view of the yawning gulf below him. Marla's wolf sailed through the empty air high above the docks, and the heavily laden second lift platform rose up to meet her from below. Marla and Rhaega smashed into the crate-filled platform. The males followed close behind. Gauss crumpled in a heap on impact, sending Garrett crashing against an unyielding wall of vegetable bins. His side exploded with pain where the Templar had kicked him before, and now he had run afoul of a load of cabbage. Garrett groaned and shut his eyes against the pain, only thinking to pull his hood back over his head when Marla called his name. He opened his eyes to see her looking down at him. He saw the surprise in her eyes, the pity. He tugged the hood low over his brow and struggled to his feet, ignoring her proffered hand. "I'm all right," he said. "Where's Warren?"
"Over here!"
Warren cried. Garrett and Marla scrambled over the tops of the crates to the far edge of the platform. Warren hung by his claws from the side, his shaggy legs kicking wildly in the empty air below.
"Get me up!"
The wide-eyed ghoul shouted. Garrett grabbed his friend's wrist with no idea how he would ever lift the massive ghoul. Marla simply knelt and grasped Warren's other wrist and pulled. Warren's eyes went wider still as the slim girl hauled him up over the edge. Marla noticed the 2 boys' amazed looks. She shrugged.
"Vampires are strong,"
she said. They got to their feet, the loaded platform swaying only slightly compared to the nearly empty one before. The 3 wolves climbed atop the highest stack of crates in the center of the lift and looked down at them, tongues lolling.
"Thanks for nothing,"
Warren called up to the wolf that had thrown him. Husker whined and averted his eyes. Warren started to say something else, but a low groaning sound cut him off.
"What's that?" Marla asked.
"Wasn't this one going up before?" Garrett asked.
"Yes," Marla said.
"Oh, cramps!"
Warren hissed. "Well, it's not going up anymore," Garrett said. He pointed at the counterweight suspended against the cliff face above them. It had stopped moving. The groaning sound returned, louder this time. The platform suddenly dropped a few feet, sending Garrett down hard on his backside. Marla and Warren helped him up. The counterweight was higher now than it had been before, and it was ascending with growing speed.
"What's going on?"
Warren asked.
"I think they may have overloaded this lift," Marla said.
"More likely we did when we added a few dire wolves to the load," Garrett said.
"Well, that's good, right?"
Warren said.
"I mean, we want to go down, don't we?"
"Not like this," Garrett said. "Look at the chain." The 3 of them looked up at the heavy iron chain that supported the nearest corner of the platform. One of the links had started to deform under the strain, and a gap appeared where its weld began to part. It stretched dangerously close to breaking.
"Get back on the wolves,"
Marla whispered. Garrett, Marla, and Warren managed to make it to the top of the stacks and mount their wolves once again. By now, the platform's descent had accelerated to a frightful rate. Shouts of alarm rose from the docks below, and Garrett's heart raced with fear.
"We have to jump again," Marla shouted.
Garrett didn't even bother trying to answer. He just buried his face in Gauss's fur and tried to imagine standing on solid ground again. He heard the sound of chains snapping one after another as the platform twisted and fell away beneath him. He felt air rushing over him again, and then an impact. This time he held on, though the shock left his vision swimming with stars. When he could see straight again, he found himself still on Gauss's back amid a scattered jumble of empty crates. Marla and Warren were astride their wolves on either side of him. Cries of alarm and the crunch of fallen crates sounded below.
"Where now?" he managed to say. "Third lift, going down," Marla said with a tired smile.
The platform lurched and groaned.
"Or going up again,"
Marla said, looking at the gantries high above, swarming with green-clad Templars.
"Oh, that does it!"
Warren shouted.
"I'm sick of these stupid lifts!"
"Me too," Marla said. "Care to join me for a swim?"
Garrett made a sound somewhere between a sob and a laugh and held on tight. Garrett's wolf took 3 strides and jumped. Garrett opened his eyes in time to see the black water of the canal rushing up from below. Marla's laughter carried to him on a breeze that smelled of the sea and the memory of flowers. Epilogue. The girl in brown watched as the river barge floated past the dock, a great black shadow moving slowly toward the sea on the sluggish current. The boy and his companions were already below deck thanks to the vampire girl's silver tongue and their luck of finding a boat captain willing to risk the wrath of the Templars for a handful of gold coins. If they made it past Pilot's Rock, they would be safe. The Templars would pursue no further. The girl in brown could not even follow them as far as that. She walked along the dock as far as she was able before the strange, churning sensation in her belly grew too strong to ignore. Her duty to the city prevented her from going a step further. She stood and watched the barge slip away into the night, trying to make sense of her restless feeling of unease at watching it go. Why did it bother her so? She couldn't remember the last time she had dreamed of leaving the city. Anyway, where would she go, even if she could leave? No, this wasn't some childish fantasy of impossible freedom. What was it then? The sound of boots pounding against the wooden dock stirred her from her contemplation. The girl in brown looked up to see a squad of Templars running toward her, pointing toward the barge and shouting. The girl in brown started to step aside to allow them to pass, but then a strange mood came over her, and she shifted mid-step to place herself directly in their path. "Stand aside!" the lead Templar shouted as the squad bore down on her. How many years had it been since she had taken an active hand in things? Why not just step into the shadows and let them pass? This was a human quarrel, not her mission. Why get involved at all? "Out of the way, girl!" the Templar roared, breaking his stride as she maneuvered herself to block his way. His face twisted in rage, and he raised his cudgel to take a strike. The mace whistled through the damp air as he swung it hard in a downward arc. Then the Templar's arm trembled with the impact as the girl in brown caught the weapon by the haft in her vice-like grip. The man's eyes went wide as he stared down at the girl. She smiled at him as she easily twisted the cudgel from his grasp and tossed it over the side of the dock. It disappeared with a splash into the cold black water. The Templar backed away with fear in his eyes, even as the rest of his men caught up, surrounding the girl in a rough circle with their weapons ready. You're under arrest!" the disarmed Templar stammered. The girl in brown laughed and shook her head. One of the other men stepped in, swinging his cudgel at her from behind. The girl in brown shrugged off the blow and then knocked the man senseless with a hammering fist to his jaw. The lead Templar stared down at the unconscious soldier for a moment, then looked at her again, his mouth hanging open in amazement. "Who are you?" he demanded. The girl in brown grinned back at him. "Did you ever have a bad dream, but you couldn't remember what it was when you woke up?" she asked. The Templar stumbled backward as the girl in brown advanced on him. "That was me," she said. The night wind whistled past Pilot's Rock, drowning out the cries of men as the barge rolled steadily onward toward the brackish delta waters and the sea beyond. Thank you for listening to The Necromancer's Nephew by Andrew Hunter, the first book of the Song Reaver's Tale. Garrett's adventures continue in Book 2, The Hungering Flame. If you'd like to learn more about this series, please visit www.freemancer.com, Freemancer. I'm Heath Allyn, and I'm at www.heathallyn.com.